Good morning. Now, who in this room, perhaps we could have a show of hands, would like to be Chief Executive of the Football Association in England? How many? First woman, that's good news. A guy here. Mr. Dean has kept his hand down, very noticeable. Anyway, it's very interesting for someone like me to see the answer to that question. Why would anybody? At least, the job has had at least 6 occupants in the past 14 years, and that's not counting myself, who filled in on 2 or 3 significant periods. Several of those who did fill the job will tell you they never had real power to make a difference. Some of them moan endlessly about the bullying Premier League. But the reality, the fact, is that England have not won the World Cup for a mere 49 years, and fewer English-born players play in our top division every Saturday. And that's before you're reminded of the fact that I grew to know very, very much, that the public, when they're not blaming the government or the royal family for just about everything, blame the FA. But some of us never give up hope. And that's probably because we're lucky enough to know what we believe is the very good work, a lot of it unknown and unseen by the public, that is done by the FA, home and abroad, week in, week out. And so when the FA has a new, yes, yet another chief executive, we welcome that person and we hope very much that they are successful and they get the success that they deserve. And here we have someone who has had considerable experience with the likes of Cadbury Schweppes, with the likes of Mars, with the likes of Walkers, with the likes of United Biscuits, as well as winning a number of awards in business and industry, and being a qualified football coach, and an ex-Leicester City director. And, dare I say it, as I live in the West Midlands, also he is a season ticket holder of Wolverhampton Wanderers. What can we expect from the latest chief executive of the Football Association? Please welcome Martin Glenn.
Thank you very much. Hi, good morning.
The first bit of bad news is we've both got grey suits on, which encourages the stereotype. But anyway, I've got to start with the latest news. England are into the finals of Euro 2016, and there's a bloke called Rooney, whose first game I remember as if it was yesterday, and he scored a record number of goals. I mean, how do you feel this morning?
Feel good. Feel a little bit tired. It was a late night last night and early start this morning, but we actually qualified, don't forget, on Saturday.
Yeah.
With the win at San Marino. But I think the great thing we've done is we've qualified with real aplomb. You know, we've won all of our 8 games, and you can only play the teams that you're up against. There's been some criticism. You know, what can you do about it, that the team wasn't the strongest? But there's some decent teams now. Switzerland are a decent team. We've beaten them twice with a young squad, and I think that's probably the key difference. So no one in the FA is sort of, you know, naive about the fact that we're playing the most difficult game in the world, the most competitive game in the world, football. So you know, you're up against tough competition, but we've done it with a young squad, I think, playing with some flair and playing, most importantly, better than we did emerging from the World Cup in Brazil.
And as far as Wayne Rooney is concerned, do you within the FA these days, are you conscious of being there in the generation of a player who is a record goal scorer ever for his country and will be a legend for his country?
Well, I think it's great to have, but it's a team game. And I think the first one to accept that and embrace that is Wayne. There's a great little clip on the FA website, which I think has been well distributed around all the media about Wayne's speech last night in the changing room. It's worth seeing. It's only about a minute and a half. You get a measure of the man there. He's very gracious. He receives the applause of his teammates. He gets a shirt from Roy Hodgson saying 50 on the back, and makes a very good speech about how he's personally very proud, but it doesn't mean that much unless England do well. You should see it. It's very good.
Why though? I mean, this is the big question. When they get to France next year, is there any logical reason for having any confidence that England will do any better than their customary arrival in the quarterfinals? And the cynics say the departure on, England will play Germany and Germany will win on penalties.
It's been Portugal, hasn't it, the last couple of times?
Yeah, it has been Portugal.
Yeah, of course there's there's a logical reason and there's emotional reasons. If you step back, what are the reasons to be more confident this time? I think I think the managers had sort of a difficult hand of cards, I think particularly within the World Cup situation where it was quite an ageing squad. There hadn't been the rebuilding that was needed. So you start with the fact that there's been a lot of new blood coming in. I think the average age is under 25. So it's different. So, if it were exactly the same, you'd say what would be the reasons for different results? Probably not much, but the team's different. The mood of the team's different. There's a lot of learning. Roy Hodgson is a good manager with good experience. He has learnt a lot from his experience of the first, 2 tournaments. And we now have a setup at St George's Park where we're much more purposeful about the kind of backup support that we give our elite teams. And I think you might talk about women's football later on, but let me give you an example. Our women's team had a very successful World Cup, as you all know. We finished 3rd. We beat Germany for the first time. We got to the semi-finals. We didn't go there with the best team. So technically, I think the women's team in England is still some years behind Germany and France, partly because we started playing women's football later. The FA had banned women's football for longer than our continental counterparts and banned mixed football. So we start from a little bit backwards. But what worked brilliantly in that tournament was tournament management. And Mark Sampson's a very good manager, but he went out with 2 assistant managers, 3 video analysts, nutritionists, sports medical scientists, sports psychologists, a backup team. It's tournament resilience that's also part of what can be taught. So it's not just, look at Germany, why have they done so well over the years? They've done well in tournaments with not very good teams, but they overperform in the tournaments, and I think that's one of our opportunities.
Oh, so some of the Blazers who spent their time saying that the team behind the team was far too big in a previous generation, perhaps, they've been quietened, have they? Yeah.
Well, I've not had anyone say that to me. I mean, to me, it's obvious.
Well, you have now.
Okay, well, are you a Blazer, David?
Yeah, well, I hope not.
No, I mean, I think what we've tried to do, I mean, for those of you who aren't aware of it, we have effectively a centre of excellence in the Midlands called St George's Park, where the idea is that we co-locate all of the managers of all of our teams, the senior men's team all the way through down to under 16s and the senior women's team. And we're trying to apply the best practice achieved in other sports into football. So we've got a guy called Dave Reddin, who was an assistant to Clive Woodward in the 2003 Rugby World Cup. We've hired a guy called Chris Earle, who's in charge of our education system, because we want to really improve the quality of coach education. So not being afraid to learn from other elite sports is part of what the difference is. And frankly, if someone says, what's the value of a backroom staff? There's lots of good reason to demonstrate what the value is, and we're not going to take risks on it anymore. We'll send all of our teams as best prepared as we can into these tournaments.
To be fair to Soccerex, they had a very good session here on day 1, on Monday, with Andrew Strauss from cricket and Darren Lehman, the Australian coach, and Ian Ritchie from rugby football, and the guys in charge of performance for UK sport. And that was primarily about lessons for football from other sports. And they believed there were lessons from those other, and Clive Woodward, who you mentioned as well. Yeah. You've had the dilemma, quite interestingly, Martin, that I remember well, of do you give a contract to the existing coach before you get to France, so that he has that security going beyond the tournament, and you've chosen not to, which is not what the FA has done in the past.
Well, I think it's been made to be probably a bit more of an issue than it is, and Roy's very comfortable with the situation. He, more than anybody, knows it's a results game. So I think what we wanted to avoid was probably the slightly unsavoury position we had with Fabio Capello at the end of the World Cup, where it clearly didn't work for people. But it's a results game, and so the issue of contract is not a moot issue right now. Everything we want to do with Roy and the senior team is find out what are the best ways of making Roy successful, because a successful England team in the Euros is going to kick on and do great things in the World Cup. So I guess my philosophy is you pay for results and you create a tension where results have to happen, but at the same time want to give confidence and support to the people involved. So if it is a change in the FA, I think most people would see it as a welcome change, and I think it's the right one.
But you know how the English media writes it up? They write it up, it's win or bust, don't they?
Well, they can write what they will. Myself and Roy have got a very good relationship. I think he's by far and away the best coach we could have for England. His international experience is huge. He's a learner. He looks, he listens. So, our ambition is the same one, which is let's make England as successful as we can. And we've got this big ambition to win the World Cup in 2022. I love long-term ambitions, but in the long term, we're all dead. So we've got 3 tournaments till then. We've got the Euros, we've got the World Cup in Russia, which I think we'll qualify for, and we've got the Euros again, which are going to be held across Europe, but with the semis and the finals at Wembley in 2020. Why not? Why not go with ambition? Unless you have ambition, you rarely achieve. So the right ambition with then the right backup to make that ambition happen is what we're about.
Why has the chief executive of the FA in England been such an insecure job? And why do people abroad talk about the revolving door of FA leadership?
Well, I suspect it's because there's been a lot of change, and
yes,
as you said in your preamble, so I think the average is 7 in 14 years, actually, if you include your temporary spell, for which we're profoundly grateful, by the way.
Thank you very much.
So, I mean,
not everybody is, but anyway.
I think I'll answer the question directly, but let me just give you an aside. I don't come in with a pedigree in football. You did kindly point out I know a little bit about football. Clearly not the team I support, but I've had some other experience. So I get told probably once a week, Martin, it's different in football. Football's different. And there are differences to it, but I've spent my whole life working in industry saying, well, this industry is different from that industry. Thriving organisations normally have similar characteristics. So people, there is a commonality of purpose. People know what they're about. They understand what the ambition of the organisation is. And then typically as well, you don't have the same person having to deliver it there for 15 years, but you have a succession program where if new people come in, they want the same thing. So I think the criticism factually is fair because it's been a lot, but I think it's been amplified by the fact that there probably hasn't been seen to be a unity of strategy or purpose to make that work. And I think that's a challenge, for us. But I think if you start with all agreeing within the FA, but in the wider game, the leagues, what are the few things we're trying to go and do? Actually, the ambition becomes more important than the people delivering it. The other point, I'd say the FA is a little bit different from most other national associations. We're bigger. We make more money. We run Wembley. We run St George's Park. It's a more complicated organism, and that's perhaps had its challenges too.
I want to come to that, but just thinking about the leadership still for a moment. You have a chairman, Greg Dykes, who is an extrovert figure, well known certainly in the British public, and yet again, I don't think it's widely recognised that he's got to retire in, 18 months' time or so. So the revolving door goes round again. Do you think people have to, in the FA, finish at 70, however well-meaning? I was around when it was introduced, for goodness sake, and it was because certain people never seem to die at all, despite what you said earlier. do you think that's a good thing in this generation?
Well, I think the FA's facing the demographic issue just like every other organisation, to be honest. So, you know, the median age of the population, so typically 50% of Brits are 54 and under. So we're an ageing population, and at 70, you're not definitely old anymore. So I think having age-based rules is probably less applicable today, and you should be looking at merit, not age. So I think that's the case. But I'd rather sort of answer your question, if I could, by expanding it slightly, which is there is an opportunity which we plan to seize in the FA, which is to say, well, let's clear up what are the various rules. So, you know, we're looking right now, we're saying in FIFA, it's really important to have term limits. So it's not healthy to have a Sepp Blatter on his 5th term because, you know, it just leads to possibly lazy practices if you're being generous. It's not healthy. Most successful organizations, whether you start off with the, you know, the US presidency to whatever else, go for term limits. So we need to look at the whole association and look at what we think the right rules are, and not, in my view, not limit people who just happen to be 70 but could have all their faculties working, have tons of energy, and base things more on merit, but have some more prescribed checks and balances based on other rules. And it's a bit unclear right now. So the FA Council will have different rules to the board, etc. So I think it's an opportunity to clear up.
But you see, you're sitting here and saying something that some of us think is perfectly logical. And then you go over to something called FIFA, and there's 209 countries and 208 more of you. And the rest of the world has only quite recently voted against limiting terms and these sort of limits. So we're one country in this great world game.
Well, to be fair, the FIFA reform hasn't been voted down by FIFA delegates
yet.
It's been stuck in a subcommittee of ethics, brilliantly managed by Blatter, so it's never come up. So I don't think that reform has been put to people, but we know de facto FIFA will reform, and it has to. So the pressure has built. You can't put the genie back in the bottle, and that will happen. So I don't think you're going to get...
So you're more optimistic about FIFA going forward than some people, perhaps?
Yeah, much more. It's going to be much, much better because of the crisis that it's faced. I mean, the challenge of FIFA is if you know, we all have a... if you're British, it's very easy to be moralistic. We live on an island. We can take, you know, very moralistic views about foreign policy of country X, Y, or Z. If you're, I mean, I was at the FIFA convention, my 2nd week in the job, and you sit in alphabetical order, and so to my right was Equatorial New Guinea, so I became their best friends by the end of the conference. Yep. And when you talking to them, said, why are you such a big supporter of Blatter? And the guy there was very acute. He said, well, look, if you know you've been a CEO, he said, if you'd sort of shown that you doubled revenues in 5 years, if you'd transformed places where you'd taken your showpiece tournament, that you'd innovated and taken it to countries it'd never been to, and you'd broken the old order, you might actually be seen to be, you know, quite a sort of progressive guy. That's how we see Blatter. And by the way, the other thing that FIFA's done brilliantly under Blatter, it's a force for redistribution. So it's a great way of cycling money away from rich countries to poor countries to build facilities, to build football. The problem being that that level of patronage that FIFA enjoy has allowed itself to be, I think, probably abused. And I've got to be careful about what I say, but clearly within some of the receiving countries, there's not an audit trail of where money's gone. So the conditions for corrupt practices are great. But
did you say that to your friend from Equatorial Guinea?
Equatorial New Guinea, and he agrees.
Yeah.
And so, you know, nobody wants corruption. But where we are now, thankfully, is that Blatter's resigned. The sponsors are all applying appropriate pressure on them, saying, look, you know, by the way, if you take either the UK Bribery Act or the US Bribery Act, you are absolutely obliged as a corporation to make sure that you're not giving money to any other third party that might be engaged in corrupt activity. So the pressure to reform is there, and it's going to happen, and all of the candidates to varying degrees want to do it. But more importantly, there is a process that's separate to the candidates running for FIFA, which will bring in much more standard types of corporate governance that you'd expect from a big corporation. Will it ever be perfect? Nothing's ever perfect. Will it be different? Absolutely.
Is your chairman's publicly stated ambition of England winning a World Cup, the World Cup of Qatar in 2022, in the winter, as we now know, is that realistic?
It is realistic. I mean, let me step back. I mean, any good organisation, whether you're in football or business or public service, every organisation needs an ambition against which to rally. So, you know, the proverbial one of JFK in his acceptance speech in '63 saying, by the end of the decade there will be a man on the moon, you know, was a great rallying cry within the US to develop a NASA space system, etc. So if you don't have ambition, any road looks the same. So I think it's really important to us, as you said in the introduction, it's 49 years since we won a World Cup, and we're not going to win one next year.
We're going to do programmes. Henry Winter's going to write a book about 50 years of her.
Oh, there's all that. And the song, by the way, was 30 years when it came out, wasn't it? So that tells you something. So we absolutely need an ambition. And then the logic of 2022 is it kind of steps back to the kind of investments that the FA's been quietly making over the last couple of years and accelerating now, which is the development, the more scientific development of the younger teams. So when our under-17s, under-18s, 19s teams, under-20s play their counterparts in the world now, we are technically as good. We don't always win the tournaments, but you know, we've won more than we haven't. We're technically matching them, and so there is an inbuilt improvement in the technical quality of younger players, which with the system we have at St George's Park, where the coaches now, as I say, sit in the same office, they track players coming through, there's challenge about, hang on, I picked him for the 17s, you haven't picked him for the 18s, why? As opposed to in the past, it was, you know, everyone individual's pet project. So there is a building sort of quality, and within the clubs, there is something called the EPPP, the Elite Player Performance Programme, which has received vast investment from the clubs, a decent amount of investment contribution from the FA as well, which is seeing a real improvement in the quality of players. So it's a steady build. There's no silver bullet to it, so I can't.
Yeah.
Would you put your life on winning a World Cup? Well, of course you wouldn't, because anything could happen.
Sure.
Will we be better placed? We will, but we're going to build to that. We'll do better in the Euros.
Yep.
I think we'll do better in Russia. And so it will be a build, and it's logical. But things are getting better. But
one of the building blocks isn't there. There isn't an improvement in the percentage of English-born players playing consistently at the top level, and we haven't made. Not only have we not made progress, you've gone backwards.
No, we have gone backwards, and it's a really important issue, but I think we just need to try and put it in perspective. I do care about it. I think the clubs care about it. So if you start with the clubs, I mentioned they're all investing very heavily into their academies. The academies are extremely good, and they are economically incentivized to produce English players to play in their teams. You know, so if you look at the value of the England team last night, it's high. You know, every one of them's a multi-million type candidate. So the clubs want it to work. You know, but I'd say as well the relative lack of success in international tournaments that we've had really since 1970. You could argue that there was a degree of bad luck in 70, but really the dull years thereafter, with a peak in probably 90, you'd say, was, you know, there wasn't a homegrown player problem. There were other problems. So I think it's really important not to just pick on one issue and say that's the only problem that we've got. So the way I look at it, the way Roy looks at it as well, is to say, well, you know, I agree we've got, compared to the Germans, we have a smaller pool of eligible players to pick from. So firstly, let's make sure of the pool we have, which is not insignificant, by the way, it's in the hundreds. Let's make sure the pool we have is tracked effectively, managed effectively if they're picked into the national teams, etc. So let's go and do that. But also, like I said, the professional clubs, both Premier League and Football League, are incentivized to find ways of sorting this out. And the critical thing we're missing is playing our opportunities for English elite players. So I don't care whether they play in the Premier League or not. I'd be very happy for them to be playing in the Bundesliga, the Dutch League, the French League, as indeed a lot of their talented guys do with ours. So I think that what creative ways between the FA and the leagues can we find to get more playing hours for people at this critical stage of development, I think is our big opportunity.
But if I'm an American owner of Club X or a Middle Eastern owner of Club Y, and I need to win next Saturday, or the Saturday after, certainly, because otherwise I'm going to get relegated, why should I bother about not my country, your country?
Well, you don't, to be brutal, but let's embrace what it is, right? Yeah. So I think it's not, the obligation, if you like, absolutely the obligation of a manager. I think Richard Scudamore of the Premier League's obligation is to make that league as successful as it can. That's what you have to do. What you need is checks and balances. The role of the FA is to look after the wider game of English football, the national teams, men's, women's, disabilities, grassroots and all that kind of thing. So it's a sensible, if you like, sort of advocacy of different positions where you hope, and I believe you can, common sense will get you to something there. But I'm not expecting a bunch of managers who's, you talk about the life cycle of a CEO of the FA, it's a lot longer than a life cycle of a Premier League manager. So they're not incentivised to take risks.
Unless you're Arsene Wenger.
Unless you're, well, and good things are there happening too. But I think it's to believe that they're suddenly going to become altruistic is not the case in point. But it's true in life. If you take the reason that most societies are successful is that competition generates a better result. So I look at it and think, well, we've got a fantastic Premier League, we've got a very good football league actually, we're attracting great talent from around the world. Surely, if your players, your English players, are playing with the best in the world, they must learn something from it. So to me, it's not as simple as, but it is a factor, but it's not the only factor, number of Premier League starts. I think the whole system is there to be improved.
You mentioned Richard Scudamore in the Premier League. Are you being bullied by the Premier League? You cannot actually tell the Premier League what you want and expect to get it, can you?
No, but it's almost like a childish thing, isn't it? I mean, so I used to.
Unfortunately, it has been childish.
No, but look,
sometimes.
I mean, you go back to the history. I mean, it's the way that football's developed in every country in the world is you have a football association, you have leagues. So, I've read the history of the Football Association. It's fascinating. They were having scraps with leagues in about 1886. So there's just people advocate different positions. And, would I rather have a really weak professional league and a strong national association where, in a weak professional league, the grounds are poor quality, people weren't going to the matches? No, not at all. So we come at it from different angles, but I think there's a lot more. And I think Richard is personally committed to a successful England team, and I think.
How does he show it? I always used to be asked this difficult question: when it was World Cup year or European Championship year, what has Club X, Y, or Z done that year that they wouldn't otherwise have done to help you and the national team? Does that ever happen?
Well, I think it has happened at various degrees, but if I flip it forward, that's what needs to happen. Certainly for 2016, which is, I think we need to shift the narrative away from it being purely a discussion about numbers of players starting to how can the clubs be helpful. So with Roy Hodgson, I've told him he needs to be very demanding of what the FA can give him, and we're going to do a number of things differently, whether it be in terms of resources or a whole number of things. And we're going to do the same thing with the professional clubs, because for them it's more about the quality of playing time, player release, those kind of things. And I think the Premier League clubs want a successful England side. For commercial reasons, right? A rising tide lifts all boats.
But do they mean it?
Yeah, they absolutely. Look, because even if they look, I don't expect somebody who's not been born in England to sort of have a visceral feel for the England team, but they operate and work here. I see fantastic investment in Premier League clubs in their local communities. I think, enlightened self-interest actually works pretty well. So I think they do really want a successful England team. They'd love to be part of it. Why not? and it would get more people going to matches. It would just look at the success of the England women's team. We've now got this surge now of women wanting to go and play football, for finishing, you know, from having a great World Cup. People waiting up to watching matches at 2 in the morning. So, you know, get a buzz again. Do well in the Euros. Do well in 2018. Does fantastic things.
How angry are you that there's no Great Britain team in the Olympics, or at least a women's team?
I think it's a huge loss. I understand the politics, which is national associations wanting to protect, you know, their ability to play in FIFA, and having a GB team they think might put that at risk. But I think particularly now, I think for the women, it's most important. I'm less bothered about the men because there's so much opportunity for high quality international competition. But for the women now, there's such a, you know, that there is, like or not, an elite group of 3 or 4 countries who see the World Cup as the most important, the Olympics rather, along with the World Cup, as the most important tournament. And I think it's a real shame. And I think had the sequence of decision making been a bit different, and had we had more time to persuade the Welsh and the Irish and the Scots, and Northern Irish and the Scots, that actually this was going to be, on balance, a better thing than not, you know, we might have had a different result, and we're going to try really hard, and there's going to be a lot of political pressure to make sure it happens in 2020. Talking
of women, we've heard a great deal from the FA about, and from Greg Dykes and from yourself, about the future and your relationships with the Premier League and abroad and FIFA. We don't seem to have heard anything about that extraordinary incident with the Chelsea team doctor at Stamford Bridge a few weeks ago. Where is the FA on that issue?
Well, I guess the FA doesn't see that as a women issue per se. We have a clear, we work to a FIFA mandate on medical support. Be in no doubt, the job of the duty of the doctor and the medical support in football is to the player, not to the employer. It's the Hippocratic Oath, and it's taken to the football pitch. That's what we support, and that's what we'll ensure continues.
But you see it as an issue for Chelsea to sort out?
I think it's possibly an issue for Chelsea to sort out, but I don't believe that Chelsea is playing in a dangerous way.
2 or 3 final things. You've only been in the job since April. You've had to make, your decision has been to make various people redundant going forward. How painful is that? And are you confident that after such a short time, you're making people who ought to be made redundant?
Yeah, so the background is we are reorganising the FA, and that was partly the brief on which I was brought in. So the board the chairman did a review of the FA over the last year and a half, and concluded, I think very sensibly, a couple of things needed to happen. We needed to be in a position to spend a lot more on grassroots facilities. We needed to improve coaching. So if you compare the number of artificial pitches per person in England compared to other Northern European countries with a similar climate, we're way behind. The so what of that is that kids are playing on a quagmire for 2 months of the year. What's the so what of that? It favours strong kids, not necessarily skillful kids. So that's one of those, one of those important but not silver bullet-like things, important things that we need to fix to build the long-term health of the game. Coaches. If you look at the number of coaches, you very kindly said I'm a qualified football coach, but I'm a level 1 qualified football coach. We have lots of people like me that run around earnestly in tracksuits to kind of help kids' teams. The number of elite coaches versus, say, Germany and Holland is lower per person. And we believe as well, qualitatively, we haven't always had the best sort of, if you like, culture of coaching to kind of adopt the principles we talked on earlier. What have you learned in rugby? What are the basic principles of adult learning? So we're investing, as you talk about losing jobs at the FA, we're losing jobs to create jobs in coaching. So there's a massive increase in coach educators going on right now at St George's Park in the elite support department of the national team. So what's happening in the FA is we're brutally spending less money on backroom staff and more money on people delivering football. So I think that's the right direction. So we're trying to get a different, if you like, purpose for the FA, or clearer purpose for the FA now. So the question, do you know what you're doing? It's always a good one, and I've had it a few times. What does a bloke who sold crisps know about football? And it's fair enough, you know. And it's to answer your question, it's not a stage of life that I enjoy. I've done it before, sure. But we've got lots of experienced people within the FA. So what we've done is we've got three effectively pillar functions in the FA: football regulation, which we've combined from a number of disparate and I think ineffective individual functions into one big one; participation and development, which is the whole grassroots area; and then technical, which is the development of the elite team, so and coach education. So that's what we're putting setting our stall up to drive. To do that, we can get a lot more efficient in terms of how we do the processing of the organisation, or outsourcing IT. You know, thinking harder about how many accountants and lawyers we need, and so it's a backroom versus front of house discussion. But you know, we've not had a real look at how we do things in the FA for a while. So whilst the objective is save money to spend on pitches and coaches, I could smell going into the place that it was very siloed. People didn't talk to one another. A lot of duplication. A lot of individual knowledge residing in people who are probably close to retirement. And so, you know, to ask the question, why do you think, without being a football expert, we can do it better, is because I've seen other organisations, when they think about things from a blank sheet of paper, doing things remarkably different. A couple of the little, you know, whys. You know, the Deutsche Fußballbund, you know, our German equivalent, has 300 people running it, and we've got 900. And it's a 50% bigger population. Accepted we have Wembley within it, so it's not quite apples for apples. Football Foundation, that's a body that was set together by the government, the Football Association, the Premier League, to invest money in improving pitches and grassroots facilities. They process today the same number of applications with 50 people that they did 3 years ago with 81 people. This is in football. How have they done it? They've automated applications to make sure it's a web-based system, and they've thought about it as an end-to-end process. They have an RAF logistician who runs it. What does he know about football? Probably not a lot. What does he know about running efficient processes? Probably quite a lot. Let's learn from it. So that's what we're trying to do.
You've almost led me into my my penultimate question. Are you trying to do too much? Isn't the FA, you know, you're organising and running Wembley, you're organising and running Burton, and you're running a women's league, and you're doing this and you're doing that. Oh, and by the way, a few things done internationally as well. The FA is trying to do too much?
Yeah, I think it's a fair challenge. I've always believed in life, you know, if you set your mind to anything, you can do it. If you try and do everything, you'll probably fall over. Mm-hmm. What we've tried to do in the reorganisation is really prioritise what the important things are. And so it's not a weasel way of avoiding your question, but I think, you know, we have Wembley. I think it's right for us to have Wembley. It makes us money and it can provide
More
money.
Important than Burton? Wembley or Burton first?
I don't think it's neither or, because they're two different things. So the National Stadium is now a great source of revenue for us to push back into the game. So that's, I think, a good thing. So I see that as a commercial lever. You know, we are a not-for-profit organisation, as you know. We make £308 million to spend back in the game. So, you know, and Wembley helps doing that. Burton is not it's a very different thing. That's our R&D facility, research and development facility. That's our showpiece for how we can apply science to making English football better. That's absolutely what we should do. And over time, more FA employees are going to be based at Burton than they are at Wembley, and I think that's entirely right. So I think that's the reason we've got those, but I think otherwise it's about just picking. I agree with you. We have some obligations by being a football association that we have to go and do, but we don't have to make them all crusades. So the big thing we're about is more coaches. You know, get a lot more coaches out there, better educated, more artificial grass pitches. Those are really important things to go and do. And then we'll manage other parts of the game. That's important. But that and of course the technical support for the elite teams, those are our three real priorities, and that's where the lion's share of money goes.
And finally, at the Soccerex Global Convention 2015, I want to put to you that the problem with the English, us English, is that we're arrogant. And we are perceived as arrogant around the world, and we are still trying to tell the rest of the world how to run football. Do you agree?
I think we're perceived as arrogant. I don't think we necessarily are, but perceptions, as you know, as they say.
Can you change that? Does it matter?
Well, I think it does matter, actually. I think as a relative newcomer coming in, the ultimate expression of arrogance, and we don't even see it, but we refer to ourselves. We go to international conventions and we say, "Hi, I'm Martin Glenn. I'm from the FA." Which one? Obviously English, because we invented it. So every other, it'd be the German Football Association, the French Football Association. So we're so assumptive.
Why don't you change the name then?
Possibly, but it's not a ultimate priority. But I think what's seen to be the case is that we get interested in the international game when it suits our purposes. We're seen to be, well, okay, you want to host a World Cup, suddenly you've got very friendly. So, it's a global game. We have to build global alliances. We have to be seen to be a force for good. We are admired. And I don't think it's the tradition. I think the tradition is very helpful, really. But I think the way that English football is run, it's clean. The Football Association is respected for the amount of things it does in terms of promoting the game. We're not admired in terms of our international performance, so that people think, well, hang on, so you're not doing that well with the men's team, so that probably counts against us. But we are seen to be transparent, professional, and that's a good thing. And we just need to make sure that we spend enough time when we go to international meetings to talk to them, to share ideas, to be interested to find out what other ideas that we have. So that will break down. And it matters because when it comes down to a 50-50 decision about whether we host a tournament or not, you'd like to get the benefit of the doubt. Now, to be fair, it is changing. So the fact that we've got the 2020 Euros, the semis and the final at Wembley, I think is a good example of re-engagement that's happened before my time, where people see us as being part of the team as opposed to selectively choosing to be part of it when it suits us. And I think that's a good thing because we want the fruits of international tournaments, the ability to influence policy going forward.
Ladies and gentlemen, I've been thrilled talking with Martin. I hope you know him and know the aspirations of English football a little better. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Back in this room, I think it's at 11:30. Thank you very much.